The incident that shattered protocol. The celestial assembly station drifted in perfect silence above the fractured rings of a dying gas giant, an artificial world built for diplomacy, not violence. Within its vast halls, species from across the galaxy gathered beneath vaulted ceilings of shimmering alloy, their forms as varied as the stars themselves. Here, war was forbidden. Here, restraint was law. And here, humanity was being judged. They stood apart, as they always did. Lieutenant Aaron Hale remained motionless near the perimeter of the Grand Chamber, his posture straight, his expression unreadable. His uniform, dark, unadorned, contrasted sharply with the elaborate ceremonial attire of the other delegates. Where others displayed status through ornament, humans displayed it through discipline. To most in the chamber, he was unsettling. To some, he was offensive. To Commander Vraxtel, he was an insult. The towering alien stood at the center of the chamber, his armored frame radiating authority. His species, the Cathari, were conquerors, dominant, proud, and unchallenged for centuries. Vraxtel's voice carried like thunder as he addressed the assembly. And yet, he continued, his multifaceted eyes narrowing, we are expected to grant equal standing to a species that clawed its way out of mud and violence barely a century ago. A murmur rippled through the chamber. The human delegation did not respond. Hill did not move. That, more than anything, irritated Vraxtel. The commander turned, his gaze locking onto the lone human officer. You, he said, pointing a clawed limb. Deathworlder. All eyes followed. Hale stepped forward with measured calm, boots echoing softly against the polished floor. Yes, Commander, he replied. His voice was steady, respectful, controlled. Vraxtel circled him slowly, like a predator inspecting prey. They tell me your kind is dangerous, the alien mused. Unstable, prone to violence. Hale said nothing. They also say you are disciplined, Vraxtel continued, leaning closer. That you follow rules. A pause. A test. Hale met the alien's gaze. We do. The chamber held its breath. Vraxtel's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. Let's test that. The strike came without warning. A crack echoed through the chamber as the commander's limb lashed out, slamming across Hale's face with enough force to stagger most beings. The sound alone sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Gasps erupted. Several representatives recoiled. Diplomatic law had been violated. Blatantly, deliberately. Hale's head turned slightly from the impact. Then he stilled. For a moment, nothing happened. 5 seconds. That was all it took. In that brief span, something shifted. Not in the room, but in the man. Hale straightened slowly. A faint red mark formed along his cheek, but his expression did not change. His breathing remained even. His eyes sharpened. Observers would later review the footage frame by frame. They would note the exact instant it happened. The moment restraint ended. Vraxtel leaned in again, towering, triumphant. No reaction, he taunted. Is this your legendary restraint, human? Hale spoke quietly. You shouldn't have done that. There was no anger in his voice. That was the first mistake. The second was not stepping back. The third was assuming the conversation was still happening. It wasn't. What followed was not a fight. It was an action. Precise. Efficient. Final. Hale moved. No telegraphed motion. No visible preparation. One moment he stood still. The next, he was inside the commander's reach. Too close. Too fast. A flicker of metal flashed at his wrist. A concealed microblade deploying in a fraction of a second. Before Vraxtel could react. Before his guards could move. Before the chamber could even comprehend what was happening. Hale struck. One motion. Clean. Silent. The commander's body remained standing for a heartbeat longer. Then the head separated. It fell. The sound it made against the polished floor echoed louder than the strike itself. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The chamber, built for negotiation, for debate, for words, had been reduced to absolute silence. Vraxtel's body collapsed a second later, heavy and final. Hale stepped back. The blade retracted. His posture returned to neutral. Threat neutralized, he said calmly. The words shattered the stillness. Chaos followed. Delegates recoiled in horror. Security forces rushed forward, weapons raised, but hesitated, uncertain, afraid. Some species emitted alarm calls. Others simply froze, unable to process what they had witnessed. It wasn't just the violence. It was the speed, the control, the lack of hesitation. Hale did not resist, as weapons were trained on him. He raised his hands slowly, complying. "I will cooperate," he said. His tone was the same as before. Steady, measured, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But across the galaxy, something had. Because the incident did not remain contained. It couldn't. Every second of the confrontation had been recorded by dozens of surveillance systems. Within minutes, the footage spread beyond the station, to ships, to colonies, to entire worlds. Billions watched. They saw the strike. They saw the stillness. They saw the 5 seconds. And they saw what came after. The severed head of one of the galaxy's most feared commanders lying on a diplomatic floor. By the time Hale was escorted from the chamber, the narrative had already begun to shift. Not barbaric, not reckless, not uncontrolled. Something else. Something far more dangerous. As the door sealed behind him, one realization spread like wildfire through every species, every system, every mind that witnessed the recording. The human hadn't lost control. He had followed it. And that meant one terrifying truth. That was restraint. The fear beneath the skin. The recording played in silence. Again and again. Across war rooms, council chambers, private quarters, and planetary networks, the same sequence repeated. Unaltered, unfiltered, undeniable. 5 seconds. That was all it took for the balance of the galaxy to shift. Inside the Celestial Assembly Station, the Grand Chamber had been sealed. What had once been a place of diplomacy was now a crime scene. The polished floors still bore the faint marks where Commander Vraxtel's body had fallen, where history had been rewritten in a single, efficient motion. Now, the galaxy demanded answers. The Emergency Council convened within the hour. Representatives from 100 species filled the chamber, their voices layered in tension, fear, and outrage. Some demanded justice. Others demanded distance. A few, very few, said nothing at all. At the center of it stood the human delegation. Unarmed, unflinching, Ambassador Elia Voss stepped forward, her presence calm in a storm of hostility. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The incident, she began, was a direct result of a violation of interspecies diplomatic law. A ripple of anger surged through the chamber. He was unarmed, one delegate hissed. He was dominant, another snapped. That is not an act of war. It was an assault, Voss replied evenly, on a deathworld species trained to respond to lethal threats. Lethal, came a sharp, incredulous voice. It was a strike, not an execution. Voss paused. Then, quietly, to you. The chamber stilled. Elsewhere, deep within a secured holding wing, Lieutenant Aaron Hale sat alone. No restraints. None were needed. He sat upright, hands resting loosely on his knees, his gaze fixed forward. A faint bruise marked his face, but it was already fading. A panel of observers watched him through reinforced glass. They had expected agitation, fear, regret. They found none. Heart rate stable, one analyst murmured. Breathing normal. Neurological scans show no distress response, another added. A third leaned forward. He doesn't even consider it unusual. Back in the council chamber, the debate intensified. You expect us to accept this? A delegate demanded. That any human can respond with lethal force over a single strike. No, Voss said. Only a trained one. That did not help. If this is your discipline, another voice cut in, then your species is fundamentally incompatible with galactic law. A pause. Then Voss said something that changed everything. You misunderstand what you saw. The chamber quieted, not out of respect, but out of instinct. That was not aggression, she continued. That was restraint. The word hung in the air like a threat. The council demanded evidence. The humans provided it. Data streams flooded the chamber, biological analyses, historical records, combat simulations. At first, the delegates dismissed them as exaggeration. Then they began to understand. Human muscle density, far beyond the galactic average. Neural response times, measured in milliseconds. Pain tolerance, extreme. Adrenaline response, capable of temporarily amplifying physical output beyond safe biological limits. These are not anomalies, Voss explained. They are baseline. The chamber shifted uneasily. In your history, a delegate asked cautiously. Voss didn't hesitate. We evolved on a deathworld. The term was not new, but its meaning had never been fully understood. Until now, a world, she continued, where survival was not guaranteed, where predators hunted relentlessly, where the environment itself was hostile, where conflict was constant, not optional. Images appeared across the chamber. Wars, ruins, battlefields stretching across centuries. This is what shaped us, Voss said. A long silence followed. Then quietly someone asked, "And you survived it?" Voss met their gaze. "We mastered it." In the observation room, Hale finally moved. Not dramatically, just a small shift of posture. One of the analysts flinched. "Did you see that? He's just adjusting position." "No," the analyst whispered. "He noticed us." They checked the monitors. Hale was looking directly at the glass. At them, even though it was designed to be one way. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Then Hale blinked and looked away. Back in the chamber, the final piece of evidence was presented. The recording, not the public version. The enhanced one, frame by frame, slowed beyond natural perception. "This," Voss said, "is what you missed." The footage played. The strike. Hale's stillness. But now details emerged. Micro-adjustments in posture. A shift in balance. Subtle muscle engagement. Calculations. Preparation. He evaluated the threat in under a second, Voss explained. Determined intent. Assessed proximity. Selected a response. The chamber watched in silence as the footage continued. The movement. The blade. The strike. Clean. Effortless. Inevitable. He could have incapacitated, Voss said. A pause. He chose not to. That realization hit harder than the act itself. The council chamber fell into a heavy, suffocating quiet. Not outrage. Not anymore. Something else. Understanding. Fear. If that was restraint, a delegate whispered, barely audible, "What does aggression look like?" No one answered, because no one wanted to know. The session ended without resolution. No sanctions. No verdict. Only uncertainty. And a growing, irreversible awareness spreading across the galaxy. Humans were not dangerous because they were violent. They were dangerous because they were not. They chose when to be. And that choice, that control, was far more terrifying than instinct. In his cell, Hale remained still, waiting, not for judgment, but for what came next. Because somewhere beyond the station, beyond the debates and the fear, the galaxy was already changing. It just didn't realize it yet. The test of dominance. The galaxy did not sleep after the incident. It watched. It calculated. And somewhere, in the shadows between fear and pride, it decided to act. The KRYL Dominion had remained silent during the emergency council. That in itself was unusual. They were not a species known for restraint. They were conquerors, efficient, ruthless, and deeply invested in maintaining their reputation as the apex military force of the known systems. Where others saw uncertainty in humanity, the KRYLL saw something else. A challenge. Supreme War Executor Thalcor stood before a vast tactical display aboard his flagship, its cold blue light reflecting across his chitinous armor. Around him, officers monitored the endless flow of data, the now infamous recording looping silently in the background. 5 seconds. Again and again. Thalcor narrowed his eyes. "A single soldier," he said at last. "One act, and the galaxy trembles." No one responded. They didn't need to. "Fear spreads faster than war," he continued. "If left unchecked, it becomes power." He turned, his voice sharpening. "And we do not share power." The declaration was swift, public, calculated. The KRYL Dominion issued a formal challenge to humanity, a controlled engagement trial sanctioned under ancient galactic law. Its purpose was simple: to test the true military capability of a species under observation. Its real purpose was simpler: to break the illusion. The Council hesitated, but fear had already taken root. If humanity truly possessed the potential the incident suggested, it had to be measured, under controlled conditions, before something worse happened. Reluctantly, approval was granted. Humanity accepted within the hour. No negotiation, no hesitation. That, more than anything, unsettled the observers. The designated battlefield lay in an uninhabited system, empty, silent, far from civilian routes. Dozens of observation vessels gathered at its edge, representing nearly every major species in the galaxy. They came to witness a correction, a demonstration that humans, despite their unsettling display, were still inferior, still manageable, still small. Then the fleets arrived. The KRYLL Dominion came first. Their armada filled the void, sleek, angular warships bristling with weapon arrays. Their formation was flawless, their presence overwhelming. It was a display of dominance as much as military strength. A statement: this is power. Moments later, the human fleet emerged, and the observers hesitated. It was smaller, much smaller. Where the KRYLL brought hundreds of warships, humanity brought a fraction of that number. Their vessels lacked the imposing bulk of the Dominion's fleet. Their designs were compact, almost understated. A murmur spread through the observation channels. That's it. This is their response. They accepted this challenge with that. Even Thalcor allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Begin recording, he ordered. Let the galaxy witness reality. The engagement began without ceremony. No speeches, no warnings, just war. The KRYLL struck first. A coordinated barrage of energy weapons surged across the void, targeting the human fleet with overwhelming force. The display was immediate, devastating, precisely what the observers expected. What they didn't expect was nothing happening. The human fleet didn't scatter, didn't retreat, didn't respond. At least, not in any visible way. Then, quietly, something changed. KRYLL targeting systems began to fail. Not catastrophically, subtly. A delay here, a misalignment there. Insignificant, until it wasn't. Executor, an officer said, tension creeping into his voice. We are experiencing minor system disruptions. Compensate, Thalcor replied, unimpressed. They tried, but the disruption spread. Weapons desynchronized. Communications flickered. Formation cohesion, once perfect, began to fracture. What is this? Another officer demanded. No one had an answer. Then the humans moved, not as a unified charge, not as a visible counterattack, but as something far more precise. Individual ships broke formation, not randomly, but deliberately. Each movement calculated, each trajectory purposeful. They slipped through gaps in the KRYLL formation like blades through armor. Strikes followed. Not explosive, not dramatic, surgical. One KRYLL ship lost propulsion. Another lost weapons. A third went dark entirely, systems offline, crew unharmed. Panic didn't erupt. Not yet. Confusion did. They're not destroying us, an officer whispered. Thalcor's eyes narrowed. Why? The answer came moments later. A transmission, broadcast across every channel. Human. Calm. Unmistakable. This is a controlled engagement, the voice said. We are adhering to its parameters. Another KRYLL ship fell silent, disabled with precision. We do not escalate without cause. A pause. Then, do you? The question hit harder than any weapon. The battle continued, but its nature had changed. The KRYLL were no longer attacking with confidence. They were reacting, adapting, failing. Every move they made was anticipated. Every strategy countered before it could fully form. The humans weren't overpowering them. They were outthinking them. Systematically, relentlessly. Within minutes, the outcome was clear. The KRYLL fleet, once dominant, untouchable, drifted in disarray. Ships remained intact, but crippled. Weapons offline. Engines disabled. Command structure fractured. Alive, but defeated. Silence spread across the observation vessels. This wasn't what they expected. It was worse, because destruction could be understood. This was control. Falcor stood motionless as reports flooded in. 70% of the fleet disabled. No critical casualties. We can still fight. No, he said. The word cut through the chaos. He watched the tactical display. The human ships holding position, not advancing, not pressing their advantage. Waiting. They had won, and they had stopped. The transmission came again. Same voice. Same calm tone. This engagement is concluded. A pause. Then, softer. We hope this clarifies any misconceptions. Across the galaxy, billions watched in stunned silence. The lesson was clear. Humans did not rely on overwhelming force. They didn't need to. They fought with precision, with restraint, with absolute control. And that made them something far more dangerous than conquerors. Because conquerors could be predicted. They always wanted more. Humans only acted when necessary. It had been a warning. And now, the galaxy understood what it meant. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to know one thing with terrifying certainty. You could survive a human's mercy. The price of provocation. The galaxy changed after the KRYLL engagement. Not loudly, not all at once, but in quiet decisions, in altered protocols, in the careful distance now placed between every species and humanity. No one said it openly, but everyone understood. Humans were no longer being evaluated. They were being respected and feared. The Celestial Assembly Station reopened under heavy security. Where once there had been confidence, now there was caution. Armed patrols increased. Surveillance intensified. Diplomatic language grew sharper, more precise, carefully crafted to avoid misinterpretation or offense. At the center of it all, humanity stood unchanged. Lieutenant Aaron Hale had been released. No punishment, no apology. The council had ruled the incident justified. Technically, legally, uncomfortably. Hale returned to duty without ceremony, his presence now drawing far more attention than before. Delegates avoided proximity. Conversations quieted when he passed. He did not react. He never did. Ambassador Elia Voss resumed her position within the Grand Chamber. But the balance had shifted. Where once her words were questioned, now they were weighed carefully, measured not just for meaning, but for implication. Because the galaxy had learned something dangerous. Humans did not bluff. It happened 12 cycles later. Not in public, not in the open, but in the shadows where fear turns into desperation. A rogue faction, unaffiliated, deniable, and deeply afraid, made its move. Their logic was simple. Humanity was too dangerous to exist unchecked. If they could remove its leadership, create instability, provoke internal collapse, perhaps the threat could be contained before it grew beyond control. It was a flawed plan, but fear rarely produces perfect strategies. The target was Ambassador Voss. The method was precise. A diplomatic corridor, minimal security, a moment of isolation engineered through carefully timed disruptions in station systems. They struck fast. Silent weapons. Professional execution. It should have worked. It didn't. The first assassin died before he understood why. A blur of motion. A crack. Silence. The second fired. Missed. Hill was already moving. No hesitation. No warning. No restraint. The corridor became a storm of controlled violence. Every movement efficient. Every strike final. The attackers were skilled, coordinated, prepared for resistance. They were not prepared for him. It was over in seconds. Again, always seconds. When security forces arrived, they found Hale standing over the last surviving attacker. Alive. Barely. The human's grip was steady, his expression unchanged. "Who sent you?" he asked. The assassin laughed weakly. "You already know," he rasped. "Everyone knows." Hale didn't respond, but something in his eyes shifted. Not anger. Something colder. The council was informed within minutes. This time, there was no debate, no argument, no uncertainty. This was not an incident. This was an attack. Humanity responded. There was no declaration of war, no fleet mobilization visible to the public, no dramatic speeches, just action, quiet, precise, absolute. Within hours, the rogue faction ceased to exist, not destroyed in spectacle, not erased through bombardment, removed surgically. Leadership targets eliminated simultaneously across multiple systems. Communication networks disabled. Financial channels collapsed. Safe houses breached. No civilian casualties. No collateral damage. No warnings. Across the galaxy, intelligence networks scrambled to understand what had happened. They found fragments, traces, patterns, but no clear method. No visible force large enough to execute such a coordinated strike. It was as if the faction had simply vanished. The message came afterward, not broadcast, not announced, delivered directly to the council, and then quietly shared across the galaxy. A single statement, clear, unambiguous. We do not seek conflict. A pause, but we will end those who do. The reaction was immediate, not panic, not outrage, acceptance. Because this time, there was no misunderstanding, no misinterpretation, no illusion of restraint masking uncertainty. This was clarity. In the Grand Chamber, the Council convened one final time. Not to judge, not to debate, but to decide. The classification was outdated, inadequate, one delegate admitted. Dangerously misleading, another added. The term Deathworlder no longer applied. It implied chaos. Instinct, survival. But humanity had demonstrated something else entirely. Control, discipline, choice. The new designation passed without opposition, not because all agreed, but because none dared object. Humanity was no longer categorized by where it came from, but by what it had become. Guardians of balance. Ambassador Voss stood before the chamber one last time. Her voice carried the same calm as always. We did not come to dominate, she said. We did not come to conquer. She paused, letting the silence settle. But we will not be victims. No one challenged her. No one could. At the edge of the chamber, Hale stood watch. Still, silent, unchanged. But now, every eye that passed over him saw something different. Not a curiosity, not a threat. Something else. Something understood at last. Far beyond the station, across the endless expanse of the galaxy, the lesson settled into history. A truth carved not in words, but in action. It spread from world to world, whispered in diplomacy, encoded in military doctrine, remembered in silence. It only took 5 seconds for the galaxy to learn the cost of striking a human, and it would spend the rest of its existence remembering why it never would again.